I will start us off today. So, welcome. My name is Audra Verona Lambert, and I serve as the curator at the New Harmony Gallery of Contemporary Art. We are located in New Harmony, Indiana, and we are a part of the University of Southern Indiana. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, which was quite a milestone. So, we are now on our 51st. And to start us off on our 51st year, we have this wonderful show with Sarah G. Sharp, who's here with us today. I just wanted to give some information about the show itself and then about Sarah, and then I'll hand it off so you can hear more about her research for this very formative exhibit. So the exhibition is called Sarah G. Sharp and the Thorns Were Cleared from the Path. As you can see here on the screen, thank you, Sarah, for sharing. The exhibit is on view with us here at the New Harmony Gallery of Contemporary Art, which is located at 506 Main Street in New Harmony, Indiana. We're open Tuesdays through Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. until February 21st. So we do invite you to come out if you're available or in the area, want to come here today or tomorrow. We welcome you then. We also will be open, as mentioned, Tuesday through Saturday next week through the 21st. And we not only have this wonderful exhibition in the main space, as you see here in front of you on the screen, we also have there through the back, you can see visible kind of a small door. We have historic artifacts, which we'll probably hear a little bit more about today, that are on loan from the Historic New Harmony collection, which were actually works that inspired the exhibition itself. And I would be also remiss if I did not mention we have limited edition artworks of the three silk scarves you see here in the image in front of you for sale in the gallery shop. So do feel free to come by. You can see those in the space in the shop as well. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sarah G. Sharp here today and then hand it over so that we can hear more about the exhibit without any further delay. So about Sarah G. Sharp. Sarah G. Sharp is an artist and curator whose interests include alternative social histories, language, place, technology, and craft. She is the recipient of the McDowell Fellowship, also the Getty Library Research Grant, the Brooklyn Arts Council Grant, the Brooks Art Media Fellowship, the Bronx Museum AIM Fellowship, and residency awards at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson, the Soho 20, the Gallery Residency Lab in Brooklyn, the Textile Art Center in New York, and the Vermont Studio Center. Her exhibitions include showing at the Aldrich Museum and Real Art Ways in Connecticut, Hamden Gallery at UMass Amherst, LMAK Gallery and Field Projects also in New York City. Sarah's oral history interview with artist Elaine Rychak was published by the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian Institute, and she is the founder of the Tool Book Project, which I highly recommend you have a look at if you're not familiar with it. It is a multimodal art project that provides a direct action platform for artists in order for them to share their work and also to raise funds for various nonprofits. Sarah holds an MFA in studio art and an MA in modern and contemporary art criticism and theory from Purchase College, SUNY. She's an associate professor and the graduate program director for the Intermediate and the Digital Arts MFA program at the University of Maryland. So that's Baltimore County. She's also a faculty in the MFA and Art Practice program at SVA, which is in New York City. And she lives and works in between those two localities. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah to explain more about the exhibition and her work. Thank you, Sarah, again for being here with us today.
Thanks so much, Audra. And thank you, of course, for all of the incredible support you've given me and work you've put into putting this exhibition together. I appreciate it greatly. And thanks to everyone who's here. Thank you for joining me in my little art talk. I want to start out actually by talking a little bit about, sorry, I'm having an issue, about some earlier work so that I can just talk about what kind of maybe laid the groundwork for some of my choices in this exhibition. Back in 2014, I started a project. First of all, I come from California, so members of my family were part of the kind of counterculture commune movement. And in 2014, I came across this Life magazine issue that highlighted a commune in Southern Oregon. And I was really fascinated by it because I hadn't seen this issue of Life magazine. It was pretty famous. Some older friends of mine had seen it. It was in their home. And I was so fascinated by it, I decided I needed to find a way to integrate it into an artwork and to also allow people to be able to read the entire thing. I also started looking at whole earth catalogs. My family had several copies, and the Whole Earth Catalog, it's sort of a catalog for how to make your own commune, right? Founded by Stuart Brand. It was all of the things that he thought as an artist, actually, and a counterculture member, you needed for like your spirituality, to build your own space, and also to do crafts and later build your own computer. So I was looking at these kind of texts from this period that I think are very utopian. So for the Life magazine work, I ordered a bunch of them on eBay and I decided to embroider the entire article so that it could be laid out on the wall and a viewer could read the article because I didn't know what else I could do with it that would make it any better. And so one of the tactics I used was this really shiny metallic embroidery thread to hopefully draw people in and force them to take a little time with this written archival material. I also used that embroidery thread to recreate some of the diagrams and other kind of informatics I found in the Whole Earth catalog, where kind of because of the style of the catalog, something that might denote sort of metaphysical content would look very similar to something that maybe was also a scientific diagram. There's this kind of flattening out of meaning. And I was really interested in those images, less so in letting you know exactly what they meant, and more so in sort of producing a kind of symbolic catalog. So, as I said, I embroidered this entire article so that people could read it. Because I had all these found media magazines in my space, I then started using some of the other parts of that magazine to make a series of collages and then scan them into larger prints. And this print, the final size, I think was 20 by 30, edition of 5. The pattern that you see here was from a quilt pattern that was sold through the Whole Earth catalog. So I was really interested in the 70s, looking back at the 19th and 18th century and the kind of handicrafts as a kind of anti-industrialist countercultural move to make things with your hand. And this is the sort of start of more concentrated interest in the history of quilt making. And so then I thought I should make a quilt. So this was my first like quilt made from textiles. I used denim. I think in America, denim is the working man's fabric, and I think a lot of people on communes probably wore denim. It was found denim. And I then embroidered again more of these images, diagrams, and other symbolic media from the Whole Earth catalog. And I hand quilted it. It's a hand-tied quilt. It's 40 by 40. And then you can see it installed here where I took that print and tiled it into a wall, like wallpaper, because I was also kind of thinking about the domestic objects that were going to maybe, I imagine, took place in a commune where someone had a Whole Earth catalog. And then also this kind of banner, similarly, I'll go to the next image. Um, Similarly, like hand embroidered banner on denim, and that is also using a diagram from the Whole Earth catalog. Around this time, I attended several residencies in the Southwest and the Midwest. And I was living primarily in New York at the time. I was working in the fashion district and I had access to like really incredible bespoke fabric. And then I would go to a residency in like Kansas and sometimes have access to really incredible sewing and textile shops, but sometimes have to go to Joann's, which I grew up in the suburbs. Joanne was an old friend of mine. RIP, Joanne, we miss you. So anyway, one of the things I would come across during at one point I was in Nebraska, I think, sort of pre-hunting season, and Joann's has this whole series of bespoke fabrics. I mean, they are bespoke, that's incorrect. They're commercial fabrics that they have made for them, or they did. And some of them were these versions of the real tree fabric, which in rural US are things that we understand, I think if you have been in the rural US, as encoded as hunting shirting and things that will be made eventually by the mostly women in the Joann's fabrics into kind of camouflage outfits for hunting. Around this time, so I was very excited about that, and I bought a bunch of them because they're also these sort of beautiful, sort of terrible painting-like representations of nature. Um, I also got a hold of a digital embroidery machine around that time. So I started experimenting with these kind of symbols that I had been mashing together and reusing from the Whole Earth catalog. I started experimenting with like making my own, a symbol that might look like a diagram and might be sort of transcendent. So you can see in this kind of rainbowy symbol here, that's what those are, made with machine embroidery. And then I was still using the Whole Earth catalog sort of icons to hand embroider. Here's another example from that series. And you can see I was also kind of trying to feminize the real tree fabric. I handmade all of that fringe from this really special sparkly ribbon that I only have one ball left of. Um, and so here's kind of maybe the next step with the real tree fabric. I started painting on it with fabric paint using stencils to build up pattern on top of pattern. So I made this another kind of actual quilt. I mean, it's an odd size, but using some of these triangular forms that you'll see in work that comes after it. And this was made specifically, I pieced the quilt and tied it together and brought it to this event that was part of the toolbook project that Audra mentioned over the course of about 3 years, 3.5 years. I made a series of publications of artists' work, and we held related like events that included performance art, open mics, discussion panels. This was the final event. You'll see the date, November 2019, right? A couple of months before the sort of lockdown period from the pandemic. And I brought together some people that had been on the first panel that I held in 2016 that was about art and activism, brought them back together and asked them to work on this quilt with me while we had a discussion. We invited people from the Textile Arts Center in New York, artists, and like whoever wanted to come. And so all of these people worked on this quilt together while having this kind of cumulative discussion about parts of the project. And this was the final sort of thing. I had to bind and complete the quilt myself after that, of course, and I didn't finish it until April 2020. So this quilt actually has never been shown until now. It's in a show at the CADVC, which is an art center on the campus that I teach at at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. So I'm very excited that it's actually the quilt itself is getting shown in public now. So kind of concurrent with all of this, you saw that I had been looking at these sort of mass media, Life magazine, larger works. I was working with texts that were more kind of commercially produced. I also had been, as I was thinking about communes, I made a series of videos and other works about separatist women's land, sort of still thinking about how people build utopia. And then I got really interested in self-published independent press from this same period, countercultural period of time. And, this is really I was able to look in several archives at this media, and these are things that are true, what they might call kitchen table press. People were making them in their homes. There wasn't a lot of financial backing, right? Also, really curious about how the discussions around activism and the politics of the time were taking place within these publications, very different than today when those small communities might try to discuss things in a more public place on social media and get like intervened on by trolls and other people. So I was just kind of curious how community building took place in these small, unfunded presses. Oh. And so I took one of the things I did with that media was scan it, turn it into fabric, and turn it into wallpaper. This piece, Burn Witch Burn, you can see a close-up over here, uses scans of an article by Barbara Ehrenreich and Deidre English that it was a kind of revisioned history of witch burning. And sort of talked about that history in the UK and the US as a sort of anti-midwifery resistance to patriarchal power. And they self-published in their own pamphlet and then self-published in women's press before they actually got picked up by larger presses. So there was like a period of time before these sort of feminist positionings of history were legitimized enough to be picked up by larger presses, and that women's press was a place where that happened. Um, I also made, as you can see, a series of wallpapers that look sort of like black and white Rococo from afar, but when you look up close, you can see that it's this image of this revolutionary woman with a gun. The series was called Women Looking Revolution Repeat. And I made other wallpapers too. So I sort of brought us up to the period of like the lockdown and the pandemic and work that I made that I'd already been working on. During the actual lockdown period, I was doing some caretaking for family members that were in crisis. I wasn't allowed to go to my studio. I had a tiny apartment in New York. I needed to make small work. So I went back to the research I did on quilt patterns and I worked on turning those into my own invented um, needlepoint, smaller needlepoint works. So you can kind of see, oh, I'm so sorry. What did I do? Did I unshare?
No, you're fine. I made you a spotlight so folks see you and the presentation.
Okay, actually, something happened with my screen.
Oh, I
Okay, here we go.
see. So you're on Legacies is the screen that you
Okay,
see.
got it. I'm back. Sorry, guys. So you can see that some of the titles of these, like Starlit Diamond and Stepping Stones, those are names of the actual historic quilt patterns, which were from the 18th and 19th century that I then like adapted into my own patterns. Um, let's see. My screen sharing has been paused. I'm so sorry. I think I'm going to have to stop sharing and reshare because my screen sharing says it's been paused and I'm unable. Sorry, everyone. Let me just redo that really quickly. Okay, are we back? Great. Okay, so I scanned those and turned them into fabrics and wallpaper. And keep an eye on that fabric because it shows up in the work in the show. Another sort of that project, the needle points and this project correlate really directly to the work I made in the show. I was commissioned in 2021 to make complete this public mural for the lobby of the Public School 85 Annex in Astoria, Queens. It kind of tracks the seasons of the school year from the fall to the winter to the spring. And I Queens is one of the most diverse places in the world, as you probably know, and the gardens around the school are just full of kind of evidence of where people are from and where they've gone. So there are these kind of palimpsests of the people that have come and gone and lived in that neighborhood and planted all of their plants from the world. So I was very inspired by that, and I developed a collaged mural that consists of, I'll show you some close-ups, scans of, I also was still kind of working with this media from this print media, sort of dot matrix print media from the 60s and 70s. And so I found images, I'll show you quickly, in this nature library series. It not only has biome-based library sort of components, it also has regional library components. So I had one from North America, one from South America. So I went through these books. I pulled out plants that I knew were in the region of this part of Queens, and I scanned them at a really high resolution. Or in some cases, I scanned some kind of microscopic imagery that I could then sort of plop into different silhouettes that I was using. You can see that there's this kind of reference to the stitch line in these lines coming down. They're actually gold leaf, and the outlines of plants here and these little puffs are also gold. So they're kind of a metallic gold sitting on top of the mural, and you can see how big it is. This is the bench, so like a 5-foot person's head would probably be around here. So they're pretty big flowers. So this media, again, scanned and used parts of the media. So that brings us to the show. And I wanted to talk to you quickly about the title of the show before I get into how all the rest of the work connects. Some of you might know that New Harmony is the home to the Minerva Society, which was the very first women's society in the US. And this is an image of the Fauntleroy House where the Minerva Society met regularly. The title of the show comes from uh, the youngest member of the Minerva Society. Her name was Ella Clymer Dietz. I think she was like 14 or 15 when she joined. She was visiting her aunt in town, and they allowed her to join. Sort of going on into the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, um, uh, other societies got the credit for being the first women's society, one in Boston and one in New York. So there was a lot of controversy where people from the Midwest would stand up and say, no, the first women's society was 9 years before it was the Minerva Society. So Ella Clymer Dietz, however, member of the Minerva Society, wrote a letter in 1904 to the editor of the Women's Journal, a weekly Boston-based suffragette newspaper, and to address this issue that the Cirrhosis Society of New York was getting all of the attention. So this is what she wrote to them. The announcement that a band of women in New York had gathered together to form a society of their own was received with ridicule and scorn. However many clubs may have preceded it, none have familiarized the public mind with the idea that women could successfully organize. Many were the predictions of speedy dissolution, ridicule and obloquy, criticism. However, were born with patience and lived down. The way was made plain for others. The thorns were cleared from the path. So I found both her cooperative acknowledgement that like time and persistence and all types of representation was more important than battling out who was the first. And I loved this particularly like salient, earthy metaphor of the thorns being cleared from the path. I think it's a symbolic image that I find very hopeful today, as many of us may only see thorns ahead of us. So there are these kind of well-known histories in New Harmony of these other powerful women that I won't go into too deeply here today, but they are an important backdrop to the body of work that I made, which seeks to highlight some of the lesser known famous women in town. And one of those items is this tiny, beautiful beadwork bracelet. Please excuse my missing parentheses by Sarah Jane Cox Thrall. She made this as a child when she was part of the Owenite Community School, which was part of Robert Owens's utopian vision and McClure's utopian vision, where boys and girls both went to school. And it was one of the first free co-ed schools in the United States. And part of the training was in trades, and there was this kind of training in textiles. And this bracelet's beautiful. It's made with green velvet, tiny seed beads. It's in the project room that Audra mentioned in the back of my show. So I'm in the back of the gallery. So I'm very happy that people get to see this tiny, beautiful artifact made by, I think she was 8 years old. I didn't write that down. And then I also just wanted to point out Angel in the Forest, which is a book by Marguerite Young from 1945 that uses a very poetic kind of riffing prose. I know Audra just finished reading it, to talk about the two main utopias of New Harmony, which were the harmonist or Rappite era in the early part of the 1800s, and then the Owenite McClure sort of progressive utopian experiment starting in 1825. She's writing from the point of view of visiting New Harmony in 1945, and then kind of does this deep dive into those two utopias, sort of uncovering the less salient parts of them. But part of that text is like this really incredible description of New Harmony in 1945, including the natural landscape and kind of using plant and natural imagery as metaphor to talk about these utopian spaces. So I wanted to just like make sure I underscored that that was a really important part of my research. I also I also read many descriptions of the region before the Rapites or the Harmonists came to New Harmony, including descriptions of indigenous women harvesting and cultivating various native plants to be used for dyeing materials, food, and healthcare. And Dr. Sylvia Rhode shared a paper with me titled Harmonious Women, Millennial Messenger, Seductress, and Industrialist, where, among other things that I'll include later in the talk, she gives a description of a non-harmonist person, Clara Nodal, visiting and living with the harmonists and emphasizing the creativity and knowledge that harmonist women exercised in their gardens. So this quilt is part of the Working Men's Institute archive. The Working Men's Institute is, I think, the last version of one of these progressive libraries started by Thomas McClure and run by the town itself. It's not run by an external institution. It's an incredible archive of the town's history and other artifacts. In March 2025, I was able to spend quite a bit of time with a couple of textile items from this institute. And this one in particular was really interesting. It's titled The Whig Star Quilt. It says it was pieced just before the Civil War by 16-year-old Josephine Cox. I also looked at a series of other quilts, which I'll show you momentarily. The Whig Star quilt is really interesting because I think this was kind of a made-up pattern by this young woman. There is a historic type of quilt called the Whig Rose quilt, which I'll show you next, and then we'll come back to this. And there's one this is also from the Working Men's Institute collection. You'll notice it's unattributed. Many of these very labored textile items are not attributed or sort of shakily attributed based on maybe family lore. So in the lead up to the Civil War, there was a very popular quilt pattern that's similar to this. I'll show you. This is the one of, it can be in multiple versions. So these are from other quilt archives called the Whig Rose quilt. Yes, there was a Whig party in the US. Complicated party, but at this time stood very clearly against Andrew Jackson, stood against overt or outsized presidential powers, stood for a meritocracy and protections against the majority rule, and had a quilt pattern. So I think like this really interesting example of like women engaging in political speech and public speech in the domestic space, making wig quilts. So I'll just go back to this. I think you can see that this has very similar attributes as the examples I showed you, yellow, red, and green coloring, this kind of grid. But this one, it has stars. It doesn't have roses. I couldn't find any other examples of a wig star quilt. I think, Josephine maybe developed this. Maybe it was popular and it just hasn't been archived. But I really love this. It looks to me like the fabrics were plant dyed, the way that they're fading, also different than other quilts. It doesn't look like these were made from multiple patterns of used clothing. So there's a kind of attention to craft here where she's also hand dyeing the quilt rather than just recombining what is in her sphere. And then I'll show you and that's what I mean by these examples. The one on the left is from 1824. 1824-25 is the changeover from the Harmonists to the Owenite progressive utopian period. So I don't know if this is a Harmonist quilt square that made it into the hands of people that were working on the archives for the Working Men's Institute, or if it was like brought with a family that ended up moving to New Harmony to be part of the Owenite experiment. So interesting. And then obviously, this is from 1890, another quilt block. So in order to make this series, I developed a select illustrations of plants that are connected to women's labor and lives from different phases of New Harmony's timeline, plants harvested and cultivated before the settler colonial era by Native people, plants cultivated during the Harmonist period, and plants harvested and cultivated and imported during the Owenite and Afterglow periods. So that's sort of the broad name for what happened once the Owenite experiment transitioned into a normal town, I guess. Actually, New Harmony is still a utopia. So, um, so I put these all the illustrations together and some of the research into a zine, as you can see here, so that people could take them. It's hard when you're a research-based artist and maybe you end up making formalized objects. There's this kind of like, but where does all the information go? So I always want to make a syllabus, I guess, or share the information. So the Golden Rain Tree is this kind of iconic tree. It lines one of the main streets in New Harmony. And there was a myth for a while. William McClure, who was a naturalist and founded the progressive utopian experiment with Robert Owen, sent seeds of this tree to the townsfolk and they planted it. And so for a while, there was a story that the Golden Rain trees were only were first ever shown in uh, New Harmony, but I'm sorry, first grown in the US in New Harmony, but Thomas Jefferson had them as well. So Marguerite Young says about the golden rain tree, it was good that the Rappites had left the black locust standing and that the Owenites had planted these golden rain trees, the fastest growing tree in the world, much used in Chinese graveyards because of the lantern-shaped leaves. Otherwise, both utopias might have been forgotten, though advertised as remembered, utopias of the past seemed, in spite of their shade trees, not so tangible. And then you can see another sort of quote from Marguerite Young about the blackberry lily, connected to Thomas Say, another famous Owenite, and the Jack in the Pulpit, not a quote from Marguerite Young, but Jack in the Pulpits grow in the forest floor in this region and have a very vibrant purple. Another plant that I focused on was the puccoon, which was used. The root of the puccoon produces a very vibrant orange dye that was used by Native women in this region. It grows in Indiana and Kentucky in the prairies and woodlands. So this is an installation view um, of the gallery of the show itself. And here's one of the core pieces. It's called Wig Star Plant Index. It's 54 inches by 134 inches. I hope you noticed that I used the textile that I made previously to replicate some components of the quilt patterns that I found in the Working Men's Institute as applique on this larger quilt. I also used machine embroidery to turn my illustrations of the regional plant life across history into these embroideries on this quilt. Here are two more examples. This is wild bergamot, and on the left is puccoon, which you probably recognize because we just talked about it. Another series, I made this series of smaller banners that I kind of think of as the garden series. Each of the banners has hand embroidery with various plants that loosely relate to a period of time, but of course, people don't usually dig up all their plants when they move. Like plants stay and plants commingle across time. So I also purposefully used the same plant on some of these banners. This banner is entitled The Sisters Meadow, which refers to the Three Sisters gardening system, which was developed by Native people that lived in this region during the Mississippian period, very, very long ago. And there's a kind of in Evansville, which is where there was a kind of Mississippian settlement. There's a national park there where they sort of show the Three Sisters gardening method and have native plant dye gardens and other kinds of information about that period. You can also see that I just wanted to give you a little close up where you can see that this fabric that I applique with, I used a similar process as I did for the mural, where I scanned different textures, printed it onto fabric, and then appliqued the fabric. Same here. This is the Sun Woman's Garden. So this focuses on harmonious period plants. And the Sun Woman is a character from Revelations in the Bible that George Rapp was like really fascinated by in like a slightly problematic way. So I made her a garden. And this is called the Angel's Forest. So this is from the Owenite and sort of afterglow period, where you can see the golden rain tree in the center, hollyhock off to the upper left side, which was an important part of the Harmonist gardens. And some of these plants still exist in a kind of in the lens garden, which which retains some of the Harmonist plants. This, I just want to show you a real close-up so you can see the dot matrix, the kind of replication of the dot matrix printing process on this material. And then the Harmonists wore surprisingly brilliant clothing. In the upper right corner, you can see an image of the traditional dress from the region they were from in Swabia. They didn't necessarily dress like this, but they did retain this kind of brightly colored silk neckerchief. And so I got really interested in that and also learned about Gertrude Rapp, the granddaughter of George Rapp, who quickly after they left New Harmony got very embedded in and involved in the silk industry in the US. And you can see that these are shockingly bright and vibrant silk scarves, and these are velvet ribbons and other materials that the Harmonists, these kind of repressed religious people, made, produced in Old Economy, Pennsylvania. And on the right here, this is one of Gertrude Rapp's textile designs that has been collected by the Chicago Art Institute. So I was excited by these designs, how brilliant these colors were, how she sort of worked with the selvage on the border to mix color. And so developed my own version of silk scarves based on kind of like iconic plants from these different eras. This is the golden rain tree, clearly. This is borage, which was a Harmonist plant. I mean, it was cultivated by the Harmonists. It's still in the Lens Garden. It's sort of used to treat skin issues, inflammation. It supports respiratory health. It's a pollinator attractor. And this is amaranth, which you saw in some of the other works as well. And so Hopi red dye amaranth was cultivated by the Hopi people in the Southwest and is used to dye red textiles and lives today at Angel Mounds National Park as part of their plant dyeing teaching garden. So I then and then I that's sort of like this symbol of, I don't know, I guess plants moving across space and time and um, continuing what continues to exist in the region. Here's a quick sort of image so that you can see these large silk banners. These are 50 by 50 inches. And as Audra said, I also made smaller 26 by 26 inch scarves that are for sale on my website and at the gallery. And just finally, a big thank you, especially to Audra. Thank you so much to Heidi Taylor Cadill, Dr. Sylvia Anna Rode, Jennifer Green, Melora Adams, Grant D. DeMuzio, and the town of New Harmony. And this work was made with support from Circa, a research fellowship where I teach at UNBC. It's okay, I'll stop sharing. So thanks, everyone. If people have questions or anything, I'm happy to talk about.
Thank you everyone for joining. I just wanted to add the Indiana State Museum. So Angel Mounds Historic Site is right outside of Evansville. Technically, it's in Newburgh, which if you live here, you know they're basically one and the same on the east side. But for anyone that hasn't been, there is a Three Sisters Garden, as you heard from Sarah, and you can visit that. And there's a volunteer who runs that. So there's a lot of labor of love happening both in this show, I think, and also just around the local you guys see the plants in the area, the gardens in the area, and also native plants happening here. So you can feel free to unmute, or I'm also watching the chat. So I'm going to step off and feel free to ask your question.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my camera going as well, but it's taking a minute. Hey, there I am. Uh,
Hey, Karen.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing, so much about not just the work, but kind of like the research that led to the research that led to the work. I think it's, really interesting to hear the process, which I assume is ongoing. Um, and I guess my question is kind of around what you were talking about in terms of how you always want to build a syllabus and you always kind of want to share the research as well as that like so within your process, where is the room for kind of denaturalizing the research? You know what I mean? We're not letting it just be literal research and letting it be art. And then where is the like line of where you want to actually make sure you are committed to the knowledge production or the knowledge sharing? Like I think a lot of the sort of indigenous knowledge around the plant, no, it seems like you're sort of making sure to sort of foreground how that is knowledge and that it's not sort of this interpretation on your part. So I'd love to hear kind of how that process works. And again, I assume that it is also kind of ongoing and unfolding.
Yeah, it's very much ongoing. I think it kind of goes back and forth. Before I visited New Harmony, I listened to a bunch of podcasts, I read texts, I got a hold of Audra was like this incredible, just feeding me everything. And I hadn't, before I got there, really formulated what I was going to do. But of course, I also just like have my own formal and material based interests that I'm going to bring to it that's going to help make that kind of editing decision and formulate what gets made. And my own technical limitations. And I also, as I was going through this process of research and then visiting, and then thinking through who was represented in this space and the longest term vision of this little kind of region on the Wabash River. I did, I guess it was also new to me, I should say. New Harmony is not, it's a very well-known sort of utopian experiment that I had maybe heard of before, but it was sort of new to me. And it's a place that's been well trod by artists. There's a ceramics residency there. I'm not the first artist that's been invited from the outside to come in and make work about it. So that also shaped what I thought I needed to say, I guess, and caused me to focus more on these maybe less attributed sort of hidden parts of an archive because the Working Men's Institute as an archive is also very well known that it exists. I don't know if everyone knew that there were these quilts in the archive, Melora, the librarian, definitely knew like the people that work there now. Um, so I guess, and so it's sort of like a back and forth where then I started formulating these ideas and also just like continually rechecking that did I make an association just for fun? Like, like that might be okay in terms of what I make. Like I can have my own subjective response, but like, am I actually upholding like the sort of like ethics and positionality and actual history am I and also when I'm presenting this work in a place with it's a small town that people are deeply invested in and they know their history and maybe they don't know some parts of it. Maybe I unearthed a few things and that's really great, but um yeah. So I guess and then when I'm actually producing the part in writing to just really double check and clarify where I'm coming from. I'm not sure if I'm really answering if I'm missing part of what you asked, Karen, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big part of it, and also just kind of it sounds like it's this sort of interconnected process where it's like the
Yeah.
creativity is not separate from the research.
It isn't. And also, I will also say that as it developed from my visit, because like Audra was my first connection, and then she connected me to Dr. Rode, who is the director for communal studies, and she connected me to Jennifer, who runs the archive, like, and then it's a small town, so then I would also meet people that work in the gardens or that run a farm nearby, or, and everyone, I met former professors from USI who I got a bunch more information that was so exciting after the show was already up because they came to the show and there was a lot of really nice back and forths of, I guess, de-siloing our areas of knowledge, And so I think it is ongoing, as you said, and that part is really important. Yeah.
I just want to add here too that it was so critical that you actually were able to visit here in person, Sarah. Thank you again. I think New Harmony is a living index, but
Yeah.
everyone has their own avenue into the index. So it is true. It's a town of about 600 people on the Wabash in Southwest Indiana. So having Sarah here and hearing like a little bit of like her feedback and the conversations that she had, it also helped for me to see the town a little bit differently. And I think the visitors to the exhibit also were able to get a window into that.
Margaret, do you have your
Hey,
hand? Hi, Margaret. Thanks for coming.
oh yeah, it was so great to hear your talk. I don't really have a question. It's more like I just really love, and having known you for a little bit of time now, the continuity of your ideas from one project to the next, and also how it kind of in a way deeply relates to your own personal history of growing up and, work, in communes and things like that, but then reinterpreting that, viewing these historical, I mean, they don't really use the word communes, but they were, these historical movements, the Shakers, the Mennonites, and even, what was going on in Harmony. And it's kind of a testament to this, I guess, this just eternal need or push that people have to, step out of society, or to will the courage to look at society in a critical way and form a community based on some pretty centered, beliefs. And the fact that, like, when you think about the hippie communes, they were really connected to the land, as were these early societies. And the continuity of the interest in the plant life and everything. So it's just kind of great to see how you meld all this stuff into really credible, incredible art process and practice and give visual form. So it's really great to see.
Thanks, Margaret. I appreciate it so much. I definitely had really only been working in the 20th century, like working with archives. And it wasn't that I was unaware that there had been all these utopian experiments, prior to that. I think the colonization of America itself is like this kind of this land is one giant utopian experiment, at least
Right.
in some ways, with all of the troubles that come with the utopian experiment. But then along with that, it's a very American thing that people think they can really go off and start their own whole new society over and over again. Like it happens much here, not only here, it happens in many other places. But I also, I think in making this work, at a certain point in the middle of it, I was like, am I making flower art? I completely I had to do the little talk I just showed you to be like, okay, it is like, it's a development of things you were already looking at. It is okay. And I love flower art too. I just never
Yeah, there's nothing wrong
made
with
it, So no, I like there. I just was like, is that my thing to do? It hasn't really been my thing to do before now. So what am I doing? And then of course it was like, it doesn't matter. I'm into what I'm doing, so it's fine. But you have these like little moments of crisis, and you're like, are you stepping too far outside of the visual language you've been swimming in for 15, 20 years? And then I'm also like, you know what? That's kind of impossible. I honestly think we think we're doing something revolutionary as studio artists, and then we're like, oh yeah, I did this. Like I already did. Like,
Yeah, you never step out of it. You just
yeah, you keep
paddle around in the
yeah,
same puddle.
yeah.
So
So
anyway, so it was great to see everything. So thanks.
thanks, Margaret. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Good to see your face.
Yes. David was here too. He just had to run out.
Okay. Oh, that's nice. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. See ya.
Bye. Bye, Margaret. Thanks for coming.
I think we have time for one or two more questions if anyone has anything they'd like to add as well.
Hi,
Well, hi. I really appreciated I think I don't know if I have like a super clear question. And so I think I'm gonna like follow up on something like that Margaret and you were just talking about, which is sort of where I think I mean, first of all, just loved your talk. Very funny and informative and rich. And it's phenomenal to get to visit and do this like almost like studio visit with you after a really long time.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that element that I think is like preventing me from articulating a little bit better. But yeah, I guess I am curious about like when did it become clear to you that you wanted to respond to this space like in this way? And kind of like some of it seems to be this kind of mirroring, like you see these scarves, you know, that are being created and you're like, maybe I will create one of these too. And the investigation into the quilting seems very kind of natural, whatever that means, but because of your own like investment in kind of quilting and like the history of quilting and the sort of like history that gets embedded in the particular patterns of quilting. So yeah, I guess that's my curiosity is like, how did you decide how to respond to this space and this residency?
I think it was trying to bring together like 1,000 different little tendrils of interest um uh, and then kind of pulling back. Like the harmonists were endlessly interesting and strange. You could be married, but you had to live in like separate gender dorms. And at a certain point, George Rapp um told them all they couldn't have sex at all. And so then they just, how do they have children? And like they had like these really intense uniforms and there was like a lot of hidden labor. And so that could be its own whole thing, but people have written a lot about the harmonists already. And then this character of Gertrude Rapp sort of emerged as this kind of industrialist boss of the silk production area. And I was like, well, maybe I'm gonna do a whole project on silkworms. Like that's, there's all these stories about they ended up allowing people to come in with children because the children helped cultivate the silkworms. There's like so many problematic things happening. Gertrude Rapp wrote letters to the president about the silk industry. So she was kind of this like industrialist mogul, but no other woman, she got to learn English and had all of this education while none of the other women, so that was one thread. And I was like, okay, calm down. You can't like the history's been written. Maybe that's not your work. So I was like, she also was a designer. She designed fabrics. So that sort of is how that came about. And then I think I was that wig star quilt. I just was so totally taken by because it's really like this invented pattern. It's sort of imprecise, which I love. So I had to kind of sort through and follow, I think, what I was most drawn to and what the work that I made in this series it's also very labor intensive. I am mirroring the same labor. And so you also have to do something that you actually want to do, which I questioned during some of this too. So I'm not sure if that answers it. But a little bit was like, have other people already said some of these things? Do I need to say it? Like, what do I want and maybe think I need to say, I guess, as part of that sorting process. Did that answer, Carolyn? I'm not sure.
Yes, it did. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for your excellent question.
I think we have another question. I feel like somebody wants to jump in.
Kala, thanks for coming.
Hi, Sarah. I'm still trying to formulate the question, but I guess, when these utopian societies happen, do you ever sort of trace back any route to another country and what they were in those countries before they became this other thing? Or do they transfer, in a very direct way? And then I guess the other part of what I'm thinking about is, are you looking at utopian cultures in other countries?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think because of my family's history here, there's still maybe more for me to say about these kinds of communes and utopian cultures as they come to the US, but most of them come from other countries.
Yeah.
Both the Rappites came from Württemberg. I think I'm saying that right. I don't speak German. And were, similar story to a lot of the American experiment of like white people coming here because they're getting kicked out. They want to they want the freedom to practice their own, build their own society.
Right.
And so this kind of cult figure of George Rappe brought people here. They were in Pennsylvania first, then Indiana, then back to Pennsylvania. And then Robert Owen was Scottish and had tried out some of his kind of social experiments in parts of the UK where he was trying to reform like workhouses and thinking about educational reform and was very progressive and came here and just literally bought this town from the Rappites because they wanted to head back to Pennsylvania. So I think there are always, and I am aware of throughout time like other attempts of people sort of like leaving for the nature to start their own society, right? It's not just an American thing, it just happened here a lot. But I haven't, it just is, there's only so much time, Kala. But
Yes.
they were, there's also another huge figure from New Harmony named Fanny Alexander or Frances Wright. I'm sorry, am I mixing that up?
Yes.
Who was a friend of Robert Owen's. And she was this kind of like, traveled across the US firebrand giving speeches that were about progressive social reform and then later feminist like suffragist talks. And she was Scottish, but she came here to like be part of the American experiment and like reform. And it was great to read about that history, even though it doesn't directly come out in any of my work right now, because it was like edifying to know that there were these big progressive movements happening in the mid 19th century, like before the Civil War, like that is not, that too is part of American political history, not just a kind of conservatism that people would like to tell you is true American history, that. So that didn't quite answer that's as far as I've gone into other countries for my own work.
Right. Wasn't quite a question, so that was a perfect answer, right? So, thank you.
I wanted to throw in here too that the women of the Owen and McClure experiment actually walked around wearing like very radical clothing because they were pants. So like that just wasn't a thing that happened.
Yeah.
So even though the Harmonist women had like these like wonderful silk scarves and like beautiful outfits as part of their costumes, the Owen McClure women were just like kind of allowed. They didn't have to, but they could stomp around in like their breeches, which Fanny Wright was one of those, and it was unheard of at the time in the 1820s to do that. So
it was pre the suffragette. I think it's also Fanny Bloomer. It was pre-Bloomer. Like they were like, and there's some of these pants are in a museum at New Harmony where you can see there. Excellent. Yeah. Pockets and pants just running through town.
I am wearing a skirt, but there are no pockets. Does anyone else have a question or a thought to wrap us up here? I just want to make sure everybody got heard because I know there was a lot of excitement there all at the same time. So if that's it, I just want to say thanks again to Sarah for being here and sharing so much of your rich wealth of knowledge and research. It's super meaningful. And I know all of us here really admire the work that you do and the way that you do it. So thank you for sharing a window into that for us. And just as a reminder, this link will be on our YouTube probably early next week. So if you want to share it with someone that was unable to make it, feel free to look. We're going to probably post it on our Facebook because we're in the Midwest and that's a thing here. But I'll try to throw it up into our Instagram bio. We're at NHGCA or New Harmony Gallery of Contemporary Art, hence the acronym. Our website is usi with the .edu/nh for New Harmony and the word gallery. So I'll also try to put it there as well. But thanks everyone for joining us and have a lovely weekend. Thanks again to you, Sarah, for everything.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Carolyn. Bye, Kella. Thanks for coming.
See you, Sarah.